Alright, welcome back to the mill project. So in the last video, we actually got the mill up and running, and in this video, we need to start working on the blade guides, because right now, the blades wobble, it's not going to give me very clean of a cut. So what I came up with is, I have a bunch of these skateboard ball bearings, and these actually came off of some old skateboards that we had. They've been sitting on my shelf for probably a decade. And so I figured they would be perfect for making blade guides. Now, a bandsaw sawmill has a different type of blade guide than a bandsaw does. And I'm not really 100% sure why that is, but with a sawmill, you only hold the blade from one side. And so I have these ball bearings that are gonna fit right here on this carriage bolt. This carriage bolt has a little bit of a square piece that I'm gonna have to mill off of there so that sits nicely on there. And then I got a washer. And then I have this coupler. I only have one of these, so I'm gonna have to use that for both of my blade guides. And then this larger washer. And then all of that is going to sit through a piece of wood. And then it's gonna get another washer and a nut. And essentially what's gonna happen is the bandsaw blade is gonna be riding right here, right on these ball bearings. So I need to make an apparatus that moves. Now the cool thing about this is only one of my blade guides has to move. One of them is going to be permanently affixed, and the other one is going to have to be able to be moved around to accommodate different sized logs. So the first step is going to be getting this bolt assembly constructed, and then we can install it into the board. I really need to get myself one of those cheapo metal lathes. You know, the ones you see at like Harbor Freight and stuff? But I don't have one, so until then, I'm going to do this the fun way. All right, I think this goes without saying, this is not a how-to, okay? I'm not telling you to do this because I would not consider that safe, so be forewarned. One of the reasons that I like woodworking over metalworking is with metalworking, you get all these tiny little pieces of rolled over steel that like to just shred your hands, but just like microscopically, so they're just annoying. I know a lot of you metal guys like to wear gloves when you work, just so that you can avoid that kind of stuff, but I don't like to wear gloves around my machines. I don't feel like getting sucked into a machine anytime soon, so I just don't do metal. So anyway, that's why I do wood. So these are done. That's gonna go on there. That's gonna go on there. And then now we need to start threading these into wood. These are not the same size. I grabbed two different size bolts. I'm gonna get a longer bolt.
I needed to mill the sides off of these 2x4s so I had nice sharp corners to work with. Those of you who are wondering, yes, I'm still sick. There was no structural reason why these had to be so thick. The only reason I'm making these out of full-size 2x4s is because the blade sits so far forward from the front of the mill, and the thickness of the 2x4 gives me enough spacing so that my bearings end up in the right spot. I ended up cutting a relief in the bottom section so that I had room for the bolt to fit through. This way I didn't have to go buy any specialty bolts. The first thing I needed to do was to drill a hole where the bearing guide is going to sit. This is where I started treating the left a little bit different from the right. Both of them needed these oblong holes drilled into them. And all that does is it allows me a little bit of vertical alignment so that I can make sure that the bearings are fully pressing onto the blade as tense as I need them to. I did this by carefully drilling two holes right next to each other at the same time, rather than trying to drill one hole and then drill the next one. I decided to drill them both about an inch at a time a piece so that I could make sure that the hole was actually accurate. And then as I went, I could sort of use the drill bit sort of as a router bit, and in that way I can connect those two holes. On the right I just drilled two of these holes, and on the left I only drilled one in the center, and I'll show you why that is in a second. I guess I forgot to film drilling the hole for the countersink, but this coupler fits right into that hole, and then the screw has a nice tight fit into the piece of wood. I wasn't really trying to get these threads to stick into the wood this much, but what I was going for was I wanted it to be as tight as possible because I didn't want any play in this, since this is actually going to be guiding my blade. I needed to get this screw out of the way because it's right where I wanted to put the bearing guides. These were fairly simple to install. I just touched the bearing to the bottom of the blade, and then using the blade guide as a reference, I could just drill a hole in the upper portion. This makes sure that the lowest position that the blade guides can be is still touching the blade.
This is where I'm going to defer to some of you guys in the comments. Does this need to be pulling up on the blade, or should it just be resting? Right now it's just resting. I figure if it starts drifting, I might pull up on it a tad. I have about a ½ inch of play in there or so I can really dial that in. But I'm not really sure. I probably won't know till I start cutting.
Now I can start work on the movable blade guide. I cut the first piece so that I could jam into the upper track section, and then I put a 2x4 on the front and the back to sort of act as the rest of the guide. And these front and back ones actually had to be a much more specific fit than you would think. If I got it wrong, they would have cammed over. And to be honest, they still jam up just a little bit when I move them around. Now this is actually where I made a couple different mistakes, and I forgot to drill the holes in this block before I glued everything together, so this ended up being quite a mess. If I was ever going to do this again, I would probably try and actually cut this out to fit a hex bolt instead of this carriage bolt. This really didn't work very well. I had to take this apart again off camera and glue up a little bit more and make a few alterations, but this did end up working eventually. I realized that if I left the blade guide in this orientation, it was going to end up binding really bad against the frame. So I cut off about an 1/8 inch material on the top and bottom of this blade guide mount. That way it doesn't actually ride against the frame, it just rides in front of it. This is another one of those things where I think it's a good idea, but I'm a little worried that this might move a little bit on me once I start cutting, but I won't know that until I actually start cutting. That is so satisfying to see that move. Now on the back side I needed the exact opposite to be true, so I cut out a center section out of this 2x4 so that I could be absolutely sure I'm pulling on the frame and not this bearing block. And right here you can see that I'm actually switching over to a dado stack on a second table saw. This second table saw is a new addition to the shop that I was able to track down on the local marketplace. I am extremely excited to have this new addition into the shop, and it will be the subject of a future video. I just have to get through this mill project first. This thing is taking up all my time. I drilled a hole in the back of this spring block so that I could fit it onto this bolt. And then I realized the bolt doesn't actually fit all the way through this, so I had to cut down the block a little bit. And a long time ago I made a bunch of these knobs with these nuts embedded in them. They work very well. The way I put this in here, it can really only go one way, so unfortunately there's a top and the bottom.
Beautiful. Alright. Okay, no, pause, stop. So sometimes Carpenter Dylan doesn't always think things through all the time. So this is hindsight Dylan, and I'm gonna, you know what, I'm just gonna go down to the shop and show you what's wrong with these and how I'm gonna fix them. Let's just, there, come with me, come on. Okay, so I've had a couple of days to think about this, and there's a huge issue here. The way this is supposed to work is, you know, obviously the blade needs to be guided by the blade guide, but when there's pressure on it, it comes all the way back and it hits what I have as a washer right here. It needs to hit something so that it guides the blade and kind of keeps everything nice and straight. The problem with this one is the more I thought about it, the more I realized that, you know, actually let me show you. All right, you see that mark I made? Even with the grooves of the file, it's not really wanting to spin very well, right? So this needs to be on a bearing, and I didn't have any way of doing that with the bearings as I had them. So what I did is I went out and I bought these flanged bearings. Can you see those? And what these are bearings with a little bit of a step in them. And I'm not really sure what most people use them for, but the way I'm going to use them is I'm going to be cutting this washer just a little bit wider so that I can fit this flanged bearing into here. And then I can stack up the rest of these bearings sort of like this. Can you see that?
And you'll notice that these all have ridges in them if I align them this way. Now the sawmill blade guides actually already have ridges milled into them. It's just like that, and the reason that is for things like sawdust and fluid to be able to move through them, through the little ridges, the little gullies, without knocking the blade out of alignment too much. That's the idea. So being able to have that in my blade guides for only $14 is fantastic. Considering one of those rollers actually costs $50 plus shipping, $14 is going to work out very well. So I need to get this roller off of here and fix all of this. I found that these carbide burr tools are really good for milling small amounts of metal. And since I only had to remove a little bit of material, it worked very well. Here we go. And then I could reassemble everything. With all these ridges, it looks so much more promising than the other design. I did end up leaving one of the bearings on the back end, just to make sure that the entire blade is supported. The washers that I put around that back bearing weren't actually thick enough to stick properly. And so I found if I put 7 layers of this tape on it, it worked just perfect. I didn't have anything else to fill up that space that accurately. And these made a world of difference. Hey, thank you so much for watching my video. Let me know in the comments what you think about these blade guides. I think they are leagues above what the other ones were, but to tell you the truth, if the money was no factor, I would probably just go buy the ones that you can get. You can buy these things from Wood Miser. I think they run like $50 a piece, plus you gotta pay shipping, so that already blows my budget on this project. So far, I'm still coming way under that $300 mark. Now, in the next video, I'm gonna be building this. This is the, the housing for all the blades and wheels and all the moving parts and everything. And if you want to see how that's built, that's going to be the next video. So if you want to see that, make sure you're subscribed and click on the playlist at the end of this video so you can see all the videos in this mill project. So thanks for watching. See you in the next video. Go make something.